Hi everyone, Mike Stuchiner, Master Herbalist here. Before we begin the video, I'd like to put my disclaimer on the video. The information you're about to receive in this video is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to support or help treatment, prescriptions, or diagnosis of any medical or non-medical conditions. It is also not to be used as a substitution for your primary health care provider's diagnosis or information. Thank you. Now that that is out of the way, today's video is based on a question that I've probably gotten hundreds and hundreds of times over the last 15, 20 years in my career as an herbalist. And the question that I get a lot is wanting to know about how do I know what herb company or what product from which herb company I should be using to support and reestablish a healthy lifestyle for myself. When I say herbal company, I'm strictly speaking about companies that only make herbal medicine products, not nutraceutical companies, not companies that have vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and so on and so forth. These are companies that are strictly about making herbal products, okay? So one of the things I did many years ago that I started to compile over a many-year period is a criteria that I like to use in order to judge whether or not I think an herbal medicine company is a good company, number one, and number two, whether or not I as a trained herbalist would feel comfortable saying to a client or someone that goes to one of my lectures or even family and friends, hey, this is the company you want to use, or the products from this specific company or one of these several companies are good and safe and viable to use. So today's video is going to be part one of a two-part video. Part one, which is today, is going to be talking about the actual criteria, and then the next video I do on this topic will be talking about the companies that I very strongly feel fit that criteria and are the companies that I have suggested and recommended products from for many, many years, okay? So let's begin. Yes, I do have cheat sheets because there's a lot of information that I want to make sure I relay it to everybody in this video. So the first criteria and the first question I ask myself is, how long has this company been around? Now, I want you to understand, if a new herb company came out a year or two ago and is putting out very high quality products, that does not mean that because they've only been out for a year or two that they're a bad company. But what I have found in my experience is the longer the company's been around, the better they've been, the more established they've become, the better the reputation they may or may not have, and it's a lot easier to find information about the company the longer they've been around, because there's a history that goes along with that company. And also, even though I'm not a real big fan of reviews, whether it's on different websites where you can make reviews like Amazon or so on and so forth, the one thing I will say is that it's always interesting to me to read those one-star reviews to get a perspective of what it is the consumer who has bought the product from that company, what their mind frame is in order to have put that one-star review, okay? Some of it is just people being not so nice. Some of it is people just being angry about the fact that they picked the wrong product, or perhaps even the fact that they just didn't understand how to use the product correctly, okay? So I believe that the longer the company's been around, the better off you are, and the probability of you having of that company making better products is at a much higher rate. Is there specifically a number of how many years it has to be? No, but 10, 12, 15 years, that's a pretty good start as far as I'm concerned. Okay? Number 2, is the company owned by an herbalist? So, here's the thing. If you have a herb company that's owned by a team of marketing specialists, or a bunch of doctors, or a bunch of osteopaths, or NDs, or so on and so forth, then to me, what you might not get is the best of the best herbal products. The reason why I am a fan of using companies that are strictly owned by real trained herbalists with good quality backgrounds is because in herbal medicine, what we don't tend to do is we don't tend to think like reductionists, okay? So I have nothing against medical doctors, NDs, osteopaths, or any other form of practitioner, because I think in our society, every practitioner has a place. I don't care who they are, okay? Massage therapists, physical therapists, you name it. I think they all have a place in our society. And because of that, I have a lot of respect for anyone who wants to be or who is a practitioner of some kind. But here's the thing you have to keep in mind. The product that you'll use from a company that is not owned by an herbalist may not be in the best traditions with one of the different forms of herbal medicine, whether it's Western herbalism, Ayurvedic herbalism, or Chinese herbalism. Okay, none of those 3 forms of herbalism are based on reductionist thinking. They're based on looking at the whole and not the parts of the whole. So that to me is probably the biggest reason why I always encourage people to look into the company and find out who owns the company, who's in charge of the company, who's the big dog that makes the decisions in that company. Because that says an awful lot. Now, I should state this. If the primary or one of the primary owners is a trained herbalist and they have partners in the company who are an herbalist, that's perfectly fine. But you want to make sure that there is an herbalist that is a part of that company, okay? Because like I said, it's fairly easy to tell, or I should say for a trained eye, it's easy to tell who, when you look at products, it's easy to tell, for me at least, if that product is of a company that is owned by an herbalist, because you can usually, there are a few little telltale signs which we'll go into next, okay? So I think the first 2 part of my criteria, the first 2 steps in my criteria are very simple and basic things. They're very simple and easy to look into. A quick Google search or a quick phone call to the company will always be able to get you that information, okay? Number 3, and this to me is probably going to be the biggest section of my criteria, is looking at the formulas that are made by that company, okay? Formulas are a wonderful telltale sign of whether or not that company is an herbal company that has standards, that goes and makes decisions based on science, tradition, and education, okay? That is probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest telltale signs of what kind of a company you're dealing with, okay? So, this I've sectioned into 4 different parts. So the first part is who in the company creates the formulas, okay? I went into that a little bit when we talked about the ownership aspect just a few minutes ago, when we spoke about, do you have herbalists in the company, or the owner being an herbalist, is he or she the one who creates these formulas? Do you have naturopathic doctors on staff who help to create these formulas? Do you have biochemists on staff who help create these formulas? Or are the people that are creating your formulas marketing experts that just look at other companies' formulas and basically copycat off of it. That's really important to find out and to look into, okay? Because again, tradition, herbal traditions, science, research, and background in and the herbalist education will usually show you the quality of the formula that those herbalists or that herbal company is making, okay? Next, what is the basis? What are they basing the formula on? Okay, so again, I did just go into this, very slightly, but again, are they basing it on research? Are they basing it on a specific herbal tradition, whether it's Ayurveda, whether it's traditional Chinese medicine, or Western herbalism? And most importantly, what is their experience in those areas? Okay, because here's the thing, some formulas are based on a variety of different types of herbal medicine. You know, they may use parts of Ayurvedic medicine, and they may pull from a little bit of the Chinese medical principles, and they may pull from the Western herbal medicine principles. Okay, there's nothing wrong from pulling from a variety of different places, as long as you understand that the end formula should be based in some type of strong research and strong principle in herbal medicine, okay? The next thing that is really, really important is whoever is formulating for the company and producing these formulas, are they looking at synergy and mechanisms of action when they're creating a formula? Because you can always tell, usually, there are telltale signs where when you look at a formula, if this is a formula that looks at synergy of these different plant medicines and looks at mechanisms of action and how they are created and how they all work together in order to make a proper formula. So here's a good telltale sign. There are companies, for example, I'm just going to use a simple example, like we'll take a prostate formula, okay? And there are companies out there that have like 8 different ingredients in their prostate formula, okay? And each one of them are separately put on the label in what is known as clinical strength dosages, okay? Maximum clinical strength dosages. And the way the formula was produced most of the time in those particular cases was that what they did was they looked at each independent ingredient, looked at the research, looked at the results of the research, looked at the dosage that research and that study was based on, and they basically put 10 independent ingredients in there. They did not consider synergy. They did not consider mechanisms of action of these different herbs. All they did was they put 10 of the top ingredients known to support that specific health condition, and they put it together. And what that really leads to is not so good results, because ultimately that is one of probably the easiest ways to see that someone who thinks like a reductionist, that just looks at things as individual entities versus how things work together, that's the type of person that made a formula of that nature, okay? The final criteria under formulations is to understand this, because formulas in general are very difficult to create for the masses. For example, let's say a sleep formula, okay? It's difficult to create for the masses because there's a variety of reasons why people have trouble sleeping, okay? It can be anything from they can't turn their mind off to their body's in spasm, or because they're in pain, or because they're having anxiety issues, or because they can't control their breathing. There's a whole variety of reasons why people have trouble sleeping, or why people can't seem to put their mind and their body at rest, okay? And when you're making a formula for the masses, you want to look at whether or not that formula is broad spectrum enough that would potentially cover all of the potential reasons why a person may be having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or not sleeping well, getting into a deep enough sleep. Okay, so a good sleep formula, for example, would have a combination of, let's say, sedatives, anxiolytics. An anxiolytic is a substance that helps with dealing with anxiety. Analgesics, which are natural pain relievers, and antispasmodics, which are herbs that help to support and reduce the idea of the body being in or going into spasms, or this level of feeling like you're really locked up, okay? And a good formula created for the masses will do just that. They'll have a very broad spectrum of a variety of these different herbs within the formula. The second thing you would also look for, if you want to know if that company is making a good formula for a specific category of issue, would be if they have multiple formulas for the same issue. That one formula might be more for people who are having pain issues when they sleep, versus one might make it where people who have anxiety or can't turn their mind off in order to fall asleep. So those are usually pretty good telltale signs. If they only have one sleep formula, for example, and it's a broad spectrum sleep formula, that's a very good sign. But if it's not what you would call a real broad spectrum, and they make, let's say, 2 or 3 different kinds of formulas for the same category, that too is a really good sign that the company really understands and knows how to be able to make a good formula and produce a good working formula. Okay, 2 examples of that would be a sleep formula and an adaptogen formula. So I already spoke about the sleep aspect of the formula. So for example, with adaptogens, which is a category of herbs, is there, maybe the person has a very overstimulated system and needs what would be called calming adaptogens. Or maybe the person is really low on energy and they need something that's going to help increase that level of sustainable energy, and they need what's known as excitatory adaptogens, okay? So those would be different types of formulas for people who have specific needs. So that's why I always suggest that you look at companies that either make a broad spectrum that go across the board, or have multiple formulas within the same category. That usually shows that the company is very conscious of what they're doing, and that they understand that because it's so difficult to be able to make a formula for the masses, that they take the initiative to make multiple formulas within the same category. Okay? Number 4, in terms of my criteria, is talking about the educational material of a company. Okay? I want you to go on their website, and I want you to read whatever educational material. Is there quality, and is there accuracy of the educational material? Is the educational material that they put out there, is it just simply an opinion, or do they reference it with research? Now, don't get me wrong, not everything needs to be referenced by research. There should be articles about talking about the tradition of that form of herbal medicine. It should be given, you should also have opinions of herbalists in that article as well. What you're looking for is a wide variety and a real broad spectrum of the quality and the accuracy of the educational material. And also, who was that article written by? Was it written by someone who's in the marketing department of a company, or was it written by someone who's actually a trained herbalist and someone who understands herbal medicine? Okay? The next thing in regards to the education aspect is, do they understand how to properly put herbs in their correct category? Okay, so again, when we talk about adaptogens, when people write articles or talk about adaptogens, are these adaptogens one of the 12 or 13 true adaptogens? And how are those adaptogens being categorized? Are they being spoken of as the stimulating adaptogen or the calming adaptogen? One of the things I typically see are where people miscategorize herbs and put them in the wrong place, which frankly, one of the things that it really does is that it tends to mislead the customer into buying a product that isn't necessarily perhaps the correct product for that particular customer. And I found one of the categories that's very general and broad are the categories of nervines. Okay, there's a lot of companies out there that talk about nervines in this overall general category, or nerve tonics, when certain herbs should not be categorized as nervines. What they should be categorized as, even though they may be under the general broad heading of it, certain herbs, like for example valerian is not a sedative, so it shouldn't be categorized as a sedative. It's more of an anxiolytic. Hops is what's considered to be a true sedative. So while it may go under a general category, I think that when you're discussing the herb and the herb is being talked about in an article or in a video, it should be put in its proper subcategory. Okay, and again, that is to me a telltale sign of whether or not that company really and truly knows what it's doing. Okay. I would probably say that the final part of when we talk about quality and accuracy of educational material is, does that company have herbalists that you can speak to on staff and ask questions about their products? Now understand, all supplement companies, whether it's herbal or nutraceutical companies, do have to follow FDA regulations about not making claims about their products, but nonetheless, questions can still be asked in regards to this specific, this general overall broad category of topics, okay? The next part of my criteria is, how innovative is the company in the work that they do? So for example, is this a company who maybe uses a more, what you would call a more updated version of extraction? For example, something that came out quite some time ago. It's not so new anymore, but there's a form of extraction known as supercritical extraction, where they use CO2 as a part of the extraction process. Was the company innovative to look into something like that? Or were perhaps that company even used a very old school version of, let's say, making just tinctures, but what they did was that they then ended up adding the ash of that product, or the soot of the product, in order to bring more nutritional value to that tincture. Or perhaps a company maybe invented or came out with something known as the liquid cap, which is a capsule, a regular a regular capsule that's made of chlorophyll, or that's made of a vegetarian or vegan source, that is that can hold that liquid extract correctly. So if you're someone who travels or you're not a big fan of using tinctures, you can still get the same benefits. How innovative is their thinking? Are they stuck in the Stone Ages, or are they more innovative? And I think that that's a good telltale sign of whether or not that company is someone who is constantly trying to keep up with what's most current to the market, okay? Number 6 is, how true are they to their beliefs and to their methods? So in other words, if you have a company that believes in full spectrum extracts as being their primary source, is that how they make all their products or majority of their products? Or do they try to be what's known as, what I like to call, the jack of all trades, where some of them are isolated, standardized products, some of them are basically just the dried capsule, the dried herb milled up into a powder. If you have a small variety from a company, that's one thing, but I believe that majority of what that company makes should be true to their belief system. And I think that that's a really good way of telling whether or not that company is trying to really give you the best product possible, or if they're just trying to spread themselves out very thin in a very large market, okay? And understand that there are certain herbs that are best used in certain forms, which is why I don't hold necessarily 100% true and strict to they must make all their products in that one way. Because I don't think that's right, and I don't think that's necessarily the best way of doing it. I do think that there should be and can be variations of these products, very much dependent upon the actual herb you're talking about and you're dealing with, okay? And I would probably say the final part of my criteria, which is number 7, is transparency of the company, okay? Transparency in regards to the raw materials, in regards to testing methods, in regards to how strict is their vetting and how intense is their vetting when they partner with a farm or a raw material company from another country. What about the chain of transfer from the product that goes from that country to their warehouse or to their lab? How often, how open is the company to talking about it? So here's the deal, okay? I always encourage any consumer to pick up a phone and speak to that company, because I believe the worst case scenario is they won't tell you anything. And by not telling you anything or by not answering your questions, as far as I'm concerned, they're saying everything that needs to be said. A company that is transparent is never afraid to open up and have an open, honest discussion about those important things. Because in today's world, when many companies have to source from all over the world, like for example China, there are issues about quality and quality control and the safety of the raw material and the toxicity level of that raw material. And a company should never, ever, ever be afraid to just be open and honest about their methods of vetting and testing and sourcing their raw materials. If they are not, the light bulb in your head should go on and say, this is a check mark against that company, okay? Because none of that nonsense is proprietary information, okay? None of it is. That's all information that shows you, the consumer, that that company is being honest, open, transparent, and upfront, okay? So like I said just a few seconds ago, the worst case scenario is they tell you nothing, but never ever be afraid to call that company up and ask questions and dig. Don't accept yes or no answers. Ask for information. Ask for the source so you can therefore investigate that source. It is your right, it is your obligation as a consumer to do that with really anything across the board. Not just things you put in your body, things you put on your body. whether it really doesn't make a difference what the product is. You have a responsibility as a customer, and they have a responsibility as a company to make sure that they give you that information. So I always strongly encourage you guys to do that sort of thing. So those are the 7 things that I look at when I look at a company and say, do they hit all those check marks, or do they hit at least majority, at least 5 or 6 of the 7 check marks? And if they do, they get my thumbs up, they get the green light, and those are the companies that I will often talk about in my lectures, the companies I talk about coming up in my videos, and most importantly, the companies that I will often suggest that clients, customers, family members, and friends utilize products from. Okay, so my next video that you'll be seeing from me will be talking about, let's see here, the 4 companies that I think are the best, and why I think they're the best, and why I think you should give them your business. Okay? So until next time, take care.